I beg to move that this House do now adjourn.
The question is that this House do now adjourn. Richard Foord.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I would like to talk this afternoon about the East Devon coastline and some of the communities that are represented these days by two MPs, one for a constituency of the same name, and me, the MP for Tiverton and Honiton. The constituency I represent includes the coastal towns and villages of Seaton, Beer, Branscombe and Axmouth. My comments will relate mostly to these communities, although I can't avoid also referring to a town in the current East Devon constituency, and I've notified the Honourable Member for East Devon that I will be referring to the constituency he represents, given that some of the East Devon infrastructure that I refer to affect people who I currently represent. Last July and August, I carried out a summer tour of villages and towns that I represent, and as well as taking in some of the larger settlements like Beer and Honiton, I also visited coastal villages like Branscombe and Uplyme, and some of the points that were made to me at that time will be reflected in the debate this afternoon. Before 2022, the Honiton constituency had not been represented by anything other than a Conservative MP for over 150 years. Why do I raise this in a debate on government support for communities in the East Devon coastline? Well, it's because I suggest this Conservative rule of more than a century and a half helps to explain why there's been a tendency on the part of the Conservatives to take East Devon for granted. The National Audit Office estimates that in the decade before 2022, the real spending power of English councils was reduced by 29%. That represented the removal of £10 billion of spending power. The levelling up funding that has replaced it represents less than half that amount. If properly funded, local government can play a key role in helping our communities thrive. Yet the government's levelling up funding is an inefficient way to support local initiatives, leading to lots of nugatory work from already stretched council officers. Most councils have reached the limits of what can be achieved by efficiency savings. Further cuts will have to come from core services that are valued by communities that councils serve. So these include non-statutory services like public toilets, leisure centres and bus routes. The approach undermines local decision-making and local democracy. Decisions about what to fund are made by bureaucrats in Whitehall who are remote from the people who are affected by these decisions. Rather than devolving power, as the Liberal Democrats would, this move has served to further concentrate power here in London. I will give way.
I thank the Honourable Member for Tiverton Honiton for allowing me to intervene on him. He makes a point about levelling up funding. Of course, we have had success with levelling up funding in East Devon, in my constituency, which includes the town of Exmouth. What does he make of the claim, which is, a fundamental basement of fact, that East Devon District Council had the opportunity to apply for money to support swimming pools? In fact, they asked me to campaign for money for swimming pools, and then were the only council in the county not to apply for any funding for our swimming pools, which includes, of course, an independent pool in his constituency in Axminster. Wasn't that a huge disappointment? When the opportunity was there, it wasn't grasped by our council. What a letdown.
Well, I'm grateful to the Honourable Member for that intervention. And he's provided me with the opportunity to talk up some of the fantastic work that goes on in our leisure facilities in East Devon. He's absolutely right. The Flamingo Pool in Axminster is absolutely brilliant. I take my daughter swimming there. The volunteers who work at that pool are absolutely fantastic. And as MPs representing not only Flamingo but also LED facilities in his constituency, he'll absolutely know that we must do everything that we can to help local authorities to apply for any funding that is available.
On that point,
go ahead.
Can I commend the Honourable Gentleman for bringing this forward? Does the Honourable Gentleman recognise the good work that levelling up funding has done, and the fact that many people and many councils can take the advantage of that? And does he endorse whatever government whatever side that may be, will come for the future, that levelling up funding should be an integral part of the structure for funding for all councils right across the United Kingdom.
Well, I'm grateful to the honourable member for Strangford for that question. Of 500 bids that have been submitted for levelling up funding, only 111 were successful. And what I'm mindful of is those 389 where considerable officer work went in. And let's remember, local councils are not well staffed. In fact, actually, they've got many vacancies. They are having to make cuts to their staffing all the time. 389 bids were submitted that were not successful, and the Minister might correct me if I've got that number slightly wrong, but my understanding is 389 bids were not successful, and there was a considerable amount of nugatory work that went on in relation to those. When the Conservatives talked in their 2019 manifesto of levelling up, they were talking to communities that were crying out for just that. Yet in East Devon's coastal communities that I represent, many have been disappointed. And I'd like to make an analogy with a cream tea. When you're in Devon, if someone talks about adding condiments to a scone, we immediately think cream first. And when someone talks about levelling up, we immediately think investment in our communities. Little did we know that in both cases, what the Conservatives actually meant was jam tomorrow. The government's approach to encourage councils to use reserves and capital receipts to subsidise their revenue expenditure is unsustainable. Take, for example, the example of the £7.8 million of clawback money that Devon County Council has used recently. It received this clawback money from BT in relation to the provision of broadband internet. Rather than using it as intended for the extension of provision of broadband to rural areas, the County Council used this money to close its deficit. That got the County Council through financial year 23-24. But what happens next March when there is no payout from BT? And what happens to the thousands of constituents who I represent who struggle to access the internet, which in the 21st century is an essential utility? In the first round of levelling up funding, the South West region was ranked 9th out of 12 regions of the UK for the amount of funding received. Per head, that amounted to just £23 per person. That's less than the price of a single ticket on the railway from Honiton to Plymouth. You might as well buy a round of ice creams with the money, given how far levelling up money for East Devon will not stretch. The West Country received less than 8% of all levelling up funding from round one. Even London received more than half of that proportion. This is in spite of the fact that it was London's levels of wealth and infrastructure to which other regions of the UK were supposed to be levelled up. I would like to make an analogy here about the coast. Seeing as we're near the coast, I'd like to talk about building sandcastles. If my eldest child had a bucket full of sand and my youngest child had half a bucket of sand, I would expect that levelling up would mean that they would both result in having full buckets of sand to make grand sandcastles. Instead, what we seem to have found under this Conservative government is that levelling up has meant that they have to make sandcastles on East Devon's beaches by half filling their buckets, and anyone who lives locally will know that will be with pebbles. If we're lucky, central government will give us a flag to go on top, provided that we accept that that flag will have to have a blue tree on it. East Devon District Council has submitted a bid during each of the levelling up rounds since I've been the MP for Honiton. If successful, the bid for the Axe Valley would have supported £15 million of projects. It would have transformed Seaton Seafront. It would have provided new opportunities for decent jobs. East Devon District Council was looking to provide 3 new employment sites in Colliford Road and Harepath and Seaton, as well as in Axminster at Cloakham Lawns. Together, these could have provided around 3,000 square metres of employment space and created up to 140 decent jobs for local communities. But rather than choosing this proposal, or indeed the absolutely essential proposal that is the Town Centre Relief Road at Columpton, submitted by Mid Devon, the government chose to support Dinan Way at Exmouth. I'm not doubting the merits of that proposal, but the costs of Dinan Way have ballooned. Devon County Council's Cabinet met earlier today. It considered a successful bid to the Government's Levelling Up Fund from Round 1, which awarded over £15.5 million for Destination Exmouth. East Devon District Council put in additional funding, as did other local councils, making up together a local contribution of £1.75 million. We learned today that the Gateway project around the station at Exmouth will not be going ahead, and that roughly £4.4 million that had been earmarked for the Gateway project, schemes to help, for example, with active travel, will be shelved, and instead the more than £4 million will be rolled into the cost of the bypass at Deanon Way to offset the inflation that we've seen since the bids were submitted. I suggest that if decisions around that investment had been made locally, we might have made different decisions and we may have prioritised that funding and investment differently. An increasing proportion of East Devon's communities are older. This is particularly true of coastal towns and villages. An ageing population is increasing the complexity of care required. Chief Medical Officer Sir Chris Whitty, in his annual report last October, called Health in an Ageing Society, wrote specifically about the tendency of older people to retire and move to coastal areas, such as East Devon. He wrote, "We've really got to get serious about the areas of the country where ageing is happening very fast, and we've got to do it now. It's possible to compress the period of time that people spend in ill health, because otherwise we will end up with large numbers of people leading much more dependent lives." His report recommends providing services and environments suitable for older people, for older adults in these areas, as an absolute priority. Sir Chris Whitty says that specifically we need policies to reduce disease, to reduce disability, and to help people to exercise, eat well, and stay fit. I also refer to a report written in February this year by Becky Baird from the King's Fund, which calls for a radical refocusing of health and care, with primary care and community services at its core. It says that progress has been hampered by an incorrect belief that moving care into the community will result in short-term cash savings. Other factors include a lack of data about primary and community services, leading to a cycle of invisibility. Baird talks about urgent challenges such as accident and emergency waiting times and planned care backlogs becoming the priority for politicians tempted by quick fixes instead of fundamental improvement. In the face of this, the proposed closure of one whole wing of Seaton Hospital makes absolutely no sense to me or the constituents I represent, as I've said to various ministers in the Department of Health and Social Care and to the Prime Minister himself at PMQs. How can we expect, Madam Deputy Speaker, this Conservative government to level up in respect of complicated services like health and social care if it cannot even level up potholes? The annual Local Authority Road Maintenance Report, the ALARM, or Alarm Report, reveals that the average cost of filling in a pothole is £46. This rises to over £70 for a pothole that is filled on a reactive basis rather than having been planned. And if you talk to constituents, as I did on my summer tour, the constituents will say to me that they see repair vans coming to respond to a request to patch up a single pothole rather than dealing with the whole road. Levelling Up Fund Round 1 awarded the West Country, you will recall, £23 per head. That is the equivalent of 1/2 of one pothole filled per person. No wonder, when we drive in and out of Devon's craters, we wonder sometimes whether we are on the moon. I contend, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the levelling up concept was designed to win over marginal seats in the Midlands and the north of England in the run-up to the 2019 general election. Following that election, it quickly became apparent to the Conservatives that their 2019 electoral big tent has been shredded by the successive storms of Partygate, the interregnum ruled over by the Right Honourable Member for South West Norfolk, and the crumbling infrastructure of our coastal communities, including those in East Devon. It will take Liberal Democrat influence in the next Parliament to devolve and restore services to our communities in East Devon. Thank you.
Minister Simon Hall.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'm grateful to the Honourable Gentleman, the member for Tiverton and Honiton, for bringing forward this adjournment debate, an important debate about his area. It may just be helpful for me just to sort of set the scene, if I may, with regards to a few facts and figures. I understand entirely in the difficulty and the tensions and the problems of coastal and rural councils in delivering services. There is an additionality to cost, often triggered by a heightening of the age demographic, as the Honourable Gentleman alluded to, and of course just the sparsity of communities, not great dense conurbations, but small picturesque villages and hamlets, attractive, and they support our environment and make it a lovely place in which to live, but not without challenge to deliver public service. And that is something which is being, I think, experienced by a lot of councils in those experiences. And that is why we listened very carefully and closely to those who made representations to us during the evolution of the local government funding settlement. Pausing there for a moment, Madam Deputy Speaker, it is a point I've made to the Honourable Gentleman before, that we saw a record number of members of Parliament from across the House coming to see officials and me during the official consultation process to advocate in the strongest possible terms on behalf of their area. My honourable friend, the member for East Devon, was one of them. The honourable gentleman, the member for Tiverton and Honiton, was not. So I politely say to him, if one is serious about trying to effect change, of course an adjournment debate is an interesting platform on which to do it, but engagement in the proper channels of communication and consultation can often bring forward better results. And of course I'll give way.
I thank my friend for that point. I'm going to run through a list of some successes in our part of Devon. £15.7 million to help level up Exmouth, including the Dinham Way extension, which the Honourable Gentleman mentioned earlier. Up to £30 million from South West Water to improve water infrastructure in Sidmouth. £1.4 million to address flooding on the River Sid and the River Otter. A new school to replace Tipton St John Primary. Our incredible Nightingale Hospital, still open, still bringing down waiting lists in my East Devon constituency. And up the line in Mid Devon, which the gentleman sometimes pretends he represents, Clumpton is getting a new railway station. But meanwhile, Lib Dem East Devon District Council failed to even apply for funding for swimming pools, even though they asked me to campaign for it. It's the Lib Dems that are failing the South West, not the Conservatives.
And makes a powerful point, and maybe the Honourable Gentleman is the sort of bloke, the Honourable Gentleman from Tiverton and Honiton is the sort of bloke who complains that he didn't win the lottery. But of course he didn't buy a ticket. So how could he be expected to win the lottery? You've got to be in it to win it. And of course, not every council bid is going to be successful. But as the Honourable Gentleman for Strangford alluded to in his intervention, the effect, the dynamic effect of levelling up across the United Kingdom is being felt across communities, many of which had felt left behind, ignored, undervalued, call it what you will, by successive governments of all stripes. And if one goes and talks, Madam Deputy Speaker, to communities which are benefiting directly from the Levelling Up initiative, the Shared Prosperity Fund, the High Street Fund, and others, there's a real sense of excitement of what can be done in partnership, very often between the local authority, local businesses, and government, working in partnership to deliver beneficial change. And whilst I'm grateful to my honourable friend, the member for East Devon, for setting out with the clarity that he did the projects which have been delivered or in part funded, I'm slightly annoyed that he did, because of course he's stolen quite a lot of my remarks. And I would say, Madam Deputy Speaker, my honourable friend, the member for East Devon, was a very distinguished local journalist whose cause I used to relish taking, anything to get my views and thoughts on some local issue on the record. I sort of slightly quiver when my telephone rings to see my honourable friend's name flashing, because I know precisely what he's going to do. He's asking for further things for his part of Devon and for the wider county, advocating at the heart of government to make sure that his constituents and the wider constituents, including those of the Honourable Gentleman for Tiverton and Honiton, can see the benefit of a United Kingdom government committed to levelling up. But it's why we listened to local government. It's why we made an additional £600 million, which I know the Honourable Gentleman is aware of, in the local government finance settlement. For East Devon District Council, that saw an increase in core spending power of 5.9%, making available a total of 17.4 million for 24-25. Mid-Devon District Council, 5.9%, or 11.6%. And for the county, an increase in core spending power of 7.8%. That's an additional £56.8 million, making available a total of up to £788.8 million for Devon County Council in 24-25. 15 billion invested in a suite of complementary levelling up projects to help grow the economy, create jobs, improve transport, provide skills training, and to support local businesses. And perhaps, Madam Deputy Speaker, more powerful even than those things, as powerful and efficacious as they are, to relight a civic pride in areas such as the Honourable Gentleman represents, to see what can be done, to start a process which is, if successful and guided and managed well, really has no end in terms of the opportunities that it can provide. Of course I give way.
Thinking about the sort of enterprise that the Minister has just described levelling up funding being about, could he explain how then that led to a decision to invest £50,000 in the northwest of England on stone chess tables?
Well, there are a rubric for taking the decisions. The levelling up initiative of the department is, of course, handled by my excellent friend, the member for Redcar, and each scheme is judged against fixed criteria, and if they meet it, they go into the next round and can ultimately be successful. I'm not, I'm afraid, in a position to comment upon individual schemes, whether they've been successful or not, or indeed why they have been successful or not. That is something that he would need to take up with my honourable friend, the member for Redcar, who always makes himself available to colleagues across the House to discuss this exciting initiative of levelling up. But by my figures, £94.5 million of levelling up funding has been allocated to Devon, and that excludes legacy programmes. That's in addition to significant long-term devolved funding and powers, which we estimate are worth up to £27 million. So I dispute, as a matter of core principle, the idea that the Honourable Gentleman was trying to posit in my mind and in the mind of the House, that this government and my party takes his part of Devon, or my honourable friend for East Devon, or indeed any other seat where we have a long history of representation, for granted. The Conservative Party is a one-nation party, or it is nothing. We represent the views and aspirations of millions of people. It's why we have been the most successful political party, trying to do our best where we can for all of our communities. And he is right to reference how the terms of reference, if you will, for levelling up have evolved since it was instigated. It was initially seen as being primarily the preserve of post-industrial northern towns. But increasingly we are seeing its power in our rural communities and in our coastal communities too. And as I say to the Honourable Gentleman, as the figures as I've just set out for where Devon has been successful in the levelling up proposals, I would say that the county is doing incredibly well indeed. 16 million in levelling up funding. Round 2 has been allocated, as my honourable friend has already mentioned, for destination Exmouth. East Devon District Council received 1.8 million from the United Kingdom Shared Prosperity Fund. And of course East Devon will benefit from the heart of the South West LEP area, which was a recipient in support of £35.4 million for the Getting Building Fund programme 2020-2022. And the Community Ownership Fund has been very powerful as well in areas such as his, as they have in mine, in terms of supporting things which are of value: sports centres, arts venues, precious community spaces, and the like. Now, I have to say, the Honourable Gentleman lost me. I have to say, I didn't know whether I was building sandcastles with half a bucket. He then told us the beach I was on pebbles, so that would be a pebble castle, not a sand castle. I wasn't entirely sure whether I was putting my jam or the cream on the top or the bottom of the scone, I must confess, representing the Blackmore Vale as I do, the land of the small dairies as described by Thomas Hardy. I always view cream as the substitute for butter. It is the glue that holds the jam better, so one always puts the cream on first, topped by jam and not the other way around. I'm not quite sure where the Honourable Gentleman was putting his cream or his jam, as long as he wasn't putting it either on his children on the beach or indeed in their buckets or all over their spades. We then had the ad hominem of how life is always so much better under the Liberal Democrats. These little rays of buoyant sunshine that fleetingly shine through the clouds of the southwest from time to time, only to disappear behind the broken promises of their tuition fee pledge. And I have little or no doubt, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the same will happen again. This debate does allow me, and I appreciate this is nothing to do per se with the Honourable Gentleman, but he exhorted the House, as his party often does, of the sanctity of Liberal Democrats, of how they were some sort of higher public calling. We had elections to Dorset Council last week, neighbouring authority. A lot of people actually saying to me how better the roads are in Dorset than they are in Devon. We're very happy to exchange contractor details if necessary. But one of the most distasteful things, Madam Deputy Speaker, of last week's campaign was a senior member of his party, the leader of a neighbouring authority, so I am told, who spent quite a lot of time talking to people on the doorstep, advising that a Conservative Party candidate had stage 4 lung cancer, was unlikely to see his term out, and was possibly not going to be as attentive to his public duties as a result of having to receive chemotherapy. That gentleman, who had served his community steadfastly for years, lost his seat. That is the democratic process. I make no complaint at all about that. But I have to say, and by God, Madam Deputy Speaker, I have been waiting some years to be able to say this from this dispatch box, I will take no lessons on the qualitative assessment, usually self-fulfilled by the Honourable Gentleman's party, that somehow they are better than mine in instinct, in delivery, and in the definition of public service. Having heard what I've just relayed to the House from more than one source, and reliable sources at that, I just hope his party enjoys their temporary victory in Dorset Council. I'm not entirely sure it's the sort of victory I would have enjoyed myself. But turning back to the matters at hand, and in conclusion, he has spoken for his community. I'm grateful to him for doing so. I hope I've given him and through him the House, and through the House his constituents, as well as my honourable friends' constituents in East Devon. Some of the figures and some of the facts. An absolute underscoring of our commitment to his area, to the whole of the South West, and to any and all of our communities in the United Kingdom where need is identified and where the good offices of His Majesty's government can be deployed in order to help things along. He makes an important point about the local government funding settlement in the round, and for it to be more bespoke, more digital, rather than less analogue for the times and the demands in which we see it, given, as he and I have already discussed, a change in the demographics in his part of Devon and indeed elsewhere in the southwest. We are committed to doing just that in the next Parliament. And if I'm in post at that time, I look forward to working with colleagues from across the House and all parties, because I think in actual fact if we can try and find a cross-party solution to this that holds water and that can withstand scrutiny and is able to sustain local government and all of the good work that it seeks to do for the next 10, 20, 15 years, rather than very short-term fixes, then I think the landscape of local government and public service delivery for our communities will be very much improved. So I hope my reply has been of help to the honourable gentleman and of interest to his constituents.
The question is that this House do now adjourn. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. The ayes have it. Order. Order.
The proceeding has ended. 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 The proceeding has ended.